Please don't kick me. I'm already hurt. She never expected this. A man she barely knew stepped in to stop the attack. But what happened next will change everything. Stay with me. You're not alone anymore. Sophie Davis, a waitress just trying to make ends meet, was about to face more than just an abusive customer. What started as a public confrontation would soon escalate into a fight for her life. But Nathan has secrets of his own. This is more than just a random encounter. Sophie's world is about to collide with a billionaire's, and the consequences will be more dangerous than anyone could ever imagine. Don't miss what happens next. Will Sophie survive this dangerous game of wealth and power? Will she trust the man who saved her, or fall deeper into the trap? If you're ready for the shocking truth, hit subscribe, and tell me, where are you watching from? Drop a comment. What would you do in Sophie's shoes? The restaurant buzzed with the usual hum of conversations, clinking silverware, and the quiet rustle of napkins. But for Sophie Davis, it felt like the world had slowed to a crawl. Richard Grant, always a regular, always too arrogant for his own good, was on his usual rant. Today, however, it wasn't just words. He had already pushed her too far. His eyes were cold, filled with that familiar contempt. But today was different. This wasn't just a verbal jab. No. Today, Richard decided to make an example of Sophie in front of the entire restaurant. He reached out, his hand grabbing her wrist like a vice. Sophie tried to pull away, but it was useless. His grip tightened, and in that moment, the entire room fell silent. She could hear the clinking of a glass break in the kitchen, distant but sharp against the stillness. And then, his foot, quick and brutal, kicked her in the shin. A flash of pain, white-hot, surged through Sophie's leg. She gasped, stumbling, unable to catch herself. The sudden shock made her heart race. But it wasn't the physical pain that cut the deepest. It was the humiliation, the crushing weight of being powerless, of being seen as less than, in front of so many eyes. Please, don't kick me. I'm already hurt, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hushed gasps of the onlookers. But Richard didn't care. He never did. His lips curled into a smirk, ready to humiliate her further, when a calm, steady voice cut through the air. Is this how you treat women, Richard? The words, sharp and sure, didn't come from a server or another customer. No, they came from the man standing near the bar. Tall, dark hair, his expression unreadable. Sophie's eyes widened in confusion. Who was he? And why was he stepping in now, of all times? The man had been silent, observing from the corner, yet now he was here, standing between Sophie and the danger. His eyes locked onto Richard's, not a flicker of fear in them. Richard froze. Sophie didn't understand why. Maybe it was the man's stature, or perhaps it was the calm authority in his voice. But Richard, usually so confident, now seemed unsure. Slowly, his hand loosened from Sophie's wrist. But as he stepped back, he muttered under his breath, "You have no idea who you're messing with." The man didn't flinch. His gaze never wavered as Richard stormed off, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Sophie stood there, unsure if she could move, her leg throbbing, her heart still racing. And then, the man turned to her. "Are you all right?" His voice was soft, almost kind, but there was something behind it, something Sophie couldn't place. She nodded, still too shaken to speak. The man took a step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You're not alone anymore. My name's Nathan. If you need anything, just ask." And just like that, Sophie's world shifted. A moment ago, she had been at the mercy of Richard's cruelty. But now, someone had stepped into her life. Someone who seemed to be both a stranger and a lifeline. But Sophie had no idea just how much Nathan's appearance would change everything, nor how much danger she was about to face. Because Nathan was no ordinary man, and Sophie had just unknowingly walked into a web of secrets, power, and intrigue. As the weight of Richard's assault started to fade into the background, Sophie was left standing there, unsure whether to be relieved or terrified. The restaurant buzzed back into its rhythm, like nothing had happened. A few murmurs of disbelief, but most returned to their conversations, their meals, their lives. Sophie's heart was still racing. Her breath, shallow, coming in quick gasps, couldn't calm the fear that lodged itself deep in her chest. She could still feel the phantom of Richard's hand gripping her wrist, the burn from his foot still lingering in her leg. But then, the man, Nathan, was standing in front of her. His eyes, as sharp as a hawk's, searched hers, as if trying to gauge something deeper than just the pain in her eyes. He hadn't moved from the spot near the bar when Richard had been there, yet in one fluid motion, he stepped between them. "I'm fine," Sophie whispered, her voice small, betraying her attempt to appear unshaken. She tried to stand straighter, to shake off the humiliation, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. Nathan didn't reply immediately. He just looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, as if deciding something silently, he reached into the pocket of his jacket, pulling out a sleek black card. "Take this," Nathan said, his voice low but firm. "If you ever need help, just call. Don't wait." Sophie hesitated, unsure whether to take the card or refuse it. What could someone like him want with someone like her? What could this stranger possibly offer that would undo the sting of what Richard had just done? She looked down at the card in her hand. It was black, with only a few white letters etched across the front. No name, no company logo, just an impersonal set of digits and a phrase beneath it. "Call if you need the truth." It sounded like something straight out of a thriller novel, but it was in her hand, solid and real, and for some reason, it felt different. It felt like an answer she hadn't asked for but now couldn't ignore. Nathan didn't wait for her response. He turned slowly, walking toward the exit. For a moment, Sophie thought about calling out. She thought about asking him why he'd helped, but she stayed silent. There were too many questions, too many unknowns. Why had he stepped in? Why had he protected her when no one else would? And why did she feel like he was hiding something? There was a coldness in his eyes that didn't quite fit with the gentle way he spoke. Sophie tucked the card into her pocket, unsure of what to make of it, but still feeling its weight against her side like a secret she wasn't ready to confront. As she took a deep breath and tried to steady herself, a rush of thoughts flooded her mind. Her legs still ached, her heart still raced, and now she had an unfamiliar piece of hope and fear dancing in her chest. Would she call him? Was this the beginning of something she couldn't control? The restaurant was emptying out now, the night wearing on. But for Sophie, the night was just beginning. The shadow of what had happened loomed over her, and the memory of Nathan's gaze wouldn't let go. It lingered, reminding her that she had crossed paths with someone dangerous, someone who could change everything. As she stepped out into the cold night, her mind raced with a single question. Was Nathan just a man trying to help? Or was he something far more dangerous than the man who had just abused her? Sophie spent the next few days in a haze. The card in her pocket was a constant reminder of the strange man, Nathan, who had stepped in when no one else would. She tried to shake off the feeling that his intervention had been more than just a simple act of kindness, but the nagging doubt wouldn't leave her. The pain in her leg had subsided, but it was the emotional toll that lingered. Richard's cruelty, his ease in humiliating her. It felt like an open wound that no bandage could heal. She'd been through so much in the past year. The loss of her mother, the constant struggle to make ends meet, and now this. Sophie wondered, not for the first time, if she would ever get a break. The restaurant was as busy as ever, the same faces, the same orders. But today, it felt different. Every time she passed the bar, she couldn't help but glance at the corner where Nathan had been standing. She hadn't seen him since that night, but the memory of his calm, composed presence haunted her. And then, just as she was serving a table in the far corner, a shadow fell across her. She looked up, and there he was, Nathan. His eyes met hers instantly, like he'd been watching her the whole time. He didn't smile, didn't even nod. He simply motioned for her to approach. Sophie hesitated for a moment. Was he here to check on her, or was he something more? She told herself to stay professional, but a knot formed in her stomach as she walked towards him. This time, there was no interruption from Richard. There was only Nathan, and the overwhelming sense that he knew more than he let on. "Can we talk?" Nathan's voice was steady, but there was something in his tone that made Sophie nervous. It wasn't just the fact that he was rich, though that was clear from his expensive attire. It was the feeling that he was more than he seemed. Much more. Sophie nodded, trying to keep her composure. Sure. She led him to a quieter part of the restaurant, away from the customers. As soon as they sat down, he leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense. "I've been keeping an eye on you, Sophie," Nathan said, his voice low. "You don't have to say anything, but I know what's been going on. Richard's threats. The harassment. It's not the first time he's done this." Sophie froze. How did he know? Was he watching her every move? The questions piled up faster than she could process them. "What do you mean?" Sophie asked, her voice betraying her growing anxiety. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something much larger than herself. Nathan's gaze didn't flinch. "Richard Grant isn't just some wealthy customer who likes to make trouble. He's tied up in something far more dangerous than you realize, and I think you're unknowingly involved." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. Involved? How? She had nothing to do with Richard's world. He was just a man who came to her restaurant, an arrogant bully who'd made her life miserable. But now Nathan was telling her she was entangled in something far darker. "I've been watching Richard for a while," Nathan continued. "He's been hiding something tied to your family, your mother, Sophie. Her death wasn't an accident." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the blood drain from her face. Her mother had died under mysterious circumstances a year ago. Was Nathan implying it wasn't natural? That it was tied to Richard? "What are you talking about?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling now. She had to know more. She needed answers. Nathan leaned back in his seat, his eyes never leaving hers. "Your mother was involved in a deal, a very lucrative deal with Richard Grant. But that deal went wrong. And your mother, Sophie, she paid the price. I think they wanted her out of the picture. And now, you're the next target." Sophie felt the room close in around her. She could feel the walls pressing in, the weight of what Nathan had just said sinking deep into her chest. Her mother's death had always been suspicious. But this was something far darker than she had ever imagined. "Why are you telling me this?" Sophie whispered, the panic rising in her chest. "What do you want from me?" Nathan's expression softened for the first time. "I'm here to help you, Sophie. I've been watching Richard for years. But you need to understand something. The stakes are higher than you think. I can't protect you from him alone." Sophie's heart raced. She was caught in a web of lies, betrayal, and murder. And Nathan was the only one who seemed to have the answers. But at what cost? And what would happen if she trusted him? Sophie sat across from Nathan, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of questions, each one pulling her under further. Her mother's death, Richard Grant's involvement, the danger she now found herself in, completely unaware until this moment. Nathan didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, he studied Sophie, his eyes unwavering, as if measuring her every reaction. She could see the way his jaw clenched, the way his hand gripped the edge of the table. There was something more to him than just the well-dressed billionaire he appeared to be. He was calculating, patient, and very, very dangerous. "You're not just caught in a mess, Sophie," Nathan said after a long pause. His voice had a certain finality to it, like a man who had long since accepted the battle ahead. "You're the key to taking down Richard. He's been hiding behind his money, his power. But you have something he needs." Sophie's mind raced. The key? What did Nathan mean? She had nothing to offer, no leverage over Richard. She was just a waitress, nothing more, nothing less. Or at least, that's what she had told herself until now. "I don't understand," Sophie whispered. "What could I possibly have that he wants?" Her voice was small, fragile, as the truth of the situation sank in. She wasn't just a victim in this game. She was a pawn with a target on her back. Nathan's gaze hardened. "Your mother's records," he said. "The deal she was working on with Richard before she died. It's all hidden somewhere, and Richard will stop at nothing to keep it buried. You're the only one who can bring it to light." Sophie's blood ran cold. The words were clear, but the implications were anything but. Her mother's death had always been shrouded in mystery, but now it seemed like a dark puzzle piece in a much larger, more dangerous game. The idea of going up against Richard, someone who had destroyed her family already, seemed impossible. She was just one woman, alone. Or so she thought. Nathan leaned forward, his voice quiet but filled with a sense of purpose. "I'm offering you a chance, Sophie. A chance to stop Richard, to uncover everything he's hiding. If you join me, we can take him down together." Sophie felt the weight of his words like a chain pulling at her. This wasn't just a chance for justice, it was a dangerous gamble, one that could very well destroy everything she had left. She wasn't sure if she was ready to play that kind of game, but one thing was clear. She couldn't let Richard win. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice steadying as she made up her mind. She couldn't back down now, not when the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. Nathan's eyes never wavered. "I want you to help me find the truth, Sophie. I can't do this alone. But together, we can expose Richard for what he really is. We can get justice for your mother." Sophie felt a chill wash over her. But there was something else, too. Something she hadn't expected. It was the faintest spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this man, this stranger, was offering her the chance to fight back. But the question remained. Was she willing to trust him? Was she willing to throw herself into the heart of a battle she had never asked for, armed with nothing but the memories of a dead mother and the growing suspicion that her life was no longer her own? Nathan wasn't offering her a choice so much as an ultimatum. The decision was hers to make, but the consequences, those would be out of her hands. "Think carefully, Sophie," Nathan said softly, his words hanging in the air like a warning. "Because once you step into this world, there's no turning back." Sophie's heart raced as she looked down at the black card Nathan had given her, now burning a hole in her pocket. She felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders like a boulder, suffocating her. Could she really trust Nathan? Could she even trust herself? The night was still heavy with unanswered questions. But Sophie found herself unable to sleep. The weight of Nathan's offer pressed on her chest, relentless and unforgiving. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts a whirlwind, each one more troubling than the last. She hadn't asked for any of this. A quiet life, a job to pay the bills. That's all Sophie had ever wanted. But now, with Richard Grant's name echoing in her thoughts and Nathan's card burning a hole in her pocket, she knew nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, she found herself walking toward the restaurant, her legs heavy with doubt. Her uniform felt tight around her body, as though it no longer fit the person she had once been. She had come this far. She had made her choice to step into Nathan's world, whether she was ready or not. Nathan was waiting for her in the back booth as usual, the same cool, composed figure she had seen before. He didn't seem surprised by her decision, but his eyes softened when he saw her walk toward him. It was the smallest of gestures, but it didn't go unnoticed. Sophie didn't know if that softening was genuine or just part of his plan. "You came," Nathan said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "I wasn't sure if you would, but I knew you'd find your way here, Sophie. You have more strength than you realize." Sophie didn't know what to say. Her heart was still racing, her mind caught between fear and an inexplicable pull toward Nathan. She had never been part of a world like this, the world of billionaires, power players, and shadows in the dark. "I don't know what I'm doing," Sophie admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But I can't keep running. Not anymore." Nathan gave a small, approving nod. "You're not running, Sophie. You're fighting back, and I'll help you every step of the way." He handed her an envelope. "Inside, you'll find the details of the plan, the information on Richard's dealings, the evidence we need to bring him down." Sophie opened the envelope carefully, her fingers trembling as she pulled out the stack of papers. It was everything she needed to know. Dates, documents, secret meetings. The deal her mother had been involved in, the one Richard was desperate to bury, was laid out in black and white. And there, among the paperwork, was a list of names she recognized, names she had never wanted to see again. Her heart dropped when she saw the last name on the list. Her own. Sophie's mother had been involved in something much larger than Sophie had realized. She had been a key player in a deal with Richard, a deal that wasn't just about money. It was about power, real power, the kind that could ruin lives. "What's this?" Sophie asked, her voice shaking. "Why am I on this list?" Nathan looked at her, his gaze steady. "Your mother made a deal, Sophie. But she wasn't just selling goods or property. She was selling her future. And yours. She tied your family to Richard Grant in ways you can't even imagine. He's been covering up the deal ever since. And now, he's trying to erase every trace of it." Sophie's hands trembled as she stared at the paper. The more she read, the more she realized that her mother's death wasn't just tragic. It was part of a larger, much darker conspiracy. Richard had done whatever it took to keep this secret buried, and now she had to expose it. "What are you asking me to do, Nathan?" Sophie asked, finally meeting his eyes. "You want me to bring all of this to light? To destroy everything I've ever known?" Nathan paused for a long moment. "I'm asking you to fight, Sophie. I'm asking you to take back control of your life. Because right now, Richard has all the power. He's manipulated your mother, and now he's trying to do the same to you. If we expose him, we can take him down. But it has to be done right. Every step counts." Sophie sat back in her chair, the weight of the decision pressing on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her mother's death anymore. It was about taking back everything Richard had stolen, not just from her, but from everyone he had ever hurt. "I'm in," Sophie said, her voice steady, stronger than it had been in days. "I'll help you. We'll bring him down." Nathan's eyes flickered with something almost like approval. But behind that look, Sophie saw something else. Something she couldn't place. A shadow, maybe. A warning. "You have no idea what you've just signed up for, Sophie," Nathan said, his tone low and almost regretful. "This will change everything, and not everyone will make it out alive." The days that followed were a blur for Sophie. She felt like she had stepped into a world of shadows, a place where nothing was as it seemed. The papers Nathan had given her lay on the small kitchen table at her apartment, a constant reminder of the danger that loomed ahead. Every time she looked at them, she was filled with both determination and dread. She'd made her choice, but it hadn't come without consequences. The weight of the decision sat heavy on her chest. There was no going back now. She wasn't just fighting for her own future anymore. She was fighting to expose the truth, to bring down a man who had destroyed her family. Nathan had become both an ally and a mystery. Despite his help, despite the small comfort he offered in his calm demeanor, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than he was letting on. Every time they spoke, every time he shared information, there was a shadow of hesitation in his eyes, a darkness that hinted at his own secrets. And yet, Nathan's plan was clear. He was going to take down Richard, no matter what it took. Sophie was now a key player in this dangerous game, but she didn't know if Nathan was just using her, or if he genuinely cared. After all, why would someone with his power choose to get involved in a messy personal fight? Sophie's questions lingered, but there was no time to ask them. The walls were closing in on her, and every passing moment felt like she was being drawn deeper into a trap. But she couldn't afford to stop now, not when the stakes were this high. She had to play her part. She had to make sure Richard's secrets were exposed, no matter what. Nathan had promised her resources, support, and protection. But now, it was time to move forward. The first step was to get close to Richard, to gather more evidence of his illegal activities. Sophie had to be the one to get close enough, to access his most sensitive files, to take the final step that would bring him down. It was risky, it was dangerous, and it was everything Sophie feared. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. "You ready?" Nathan's voice broke through her thoughts, and she looked up from the papers she had been absent-mindedly staring at. Nathan stood in the doorway of her apartment, his tall frame filling the entrance. He was dressed in a dark suit, as usual, his eyes piercing, but there was something different about him today, something less guarded. Sophie felt the weight of his gaze. This time, there was no hint of the stranger she had first met. the aloof billionaire who had offered her a lifeline. No, this time, there was something more human in his eyes, something vulnerable. "I'm ready," Sophie said, her voice steady. She couldn't show fear, not now, not when she was so close to getting what she needed. She stood, grabbing her jacket and the envelope of evidence. This was it. She was about to walk into the lion's den. Nathan's expression softened just a fraction, his lips twitching into something resembling a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good," he said simply. "We have to move fast." There was something in his voice that told Sophie this wasn't just about taking down Richard anymore. There was a personal vendetta buried in his words, one she hadn't yet fully understood. As they walked out of her apartment, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that the world was shifting beneath her feet. The calm facade that Nathan wore was slipping, revealing the true danger of what they were about to do. She had been ready for a fight, but now, standing next to Nathan, she wondered if she was ready for the consequences of winning. They drove through the city in silence. The streets were slick with rain, the city lights blurred by the windshield. Sophie watched Nathan from the corner of her eye. He was focused, his hands gripping the steering wheel with an intensity that made her uneasy. "We need to get close to Richard," Nathan finally said, breaking the silence. "It's the only way. We'll do this on our terms. No one else can know about our plan." Sophie nodded, though she wasn't sure she could trust anything Nathan had said. The more she learned about him, the more questions she had, and the more she realized, this wasn't just about exposing Richard anymore. This was about survival. The closer they got to Richard, the more Sophie felt the weight of the game they were playing. Every move, every step, would be scrutinized. One wrong move, and they would both be exposed. But Nathan wasn't backing down. And neither was she. As they approached Richard's mansion, Sophie couldn't help but wonder, would they be able to pull this off? Or was this all just one last gamble before the storm hit? Sophie stood before the massive gates of Richard Grant's mansion, feeling smaller than she ever had before. The towering stone walls, the sleek black gates, and the expansive grounds seemed to stretch on forever. It was a fortress, one built on money, power, and secrecy. And now, Sophie was about to step inside. Nathan was by her side, calm as ever, his gaze fixed ahead. He had already told her the plan. Get inside, observe Richard's movements, and gather whatever information she could on his dealings. The key was to remain invisible, blend in, act like she belonged. It was easier said than done. Every inch of this world felt foreign to her. The weight of the task ahead pressed down on Sophie's shoulders. It wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. It was about survival. Richard Grant was a man who would stop at nothing to protect his secrets, and Sophie was about to expose them. One wrong move, and everything would come crashing down. As they approached the mansion, Sophie felt her heartbeat quicken. The security cameras, the guards in their sharp suits, and the pristine grounds, everything screamed danger. And yet, here she was, walking right into it, hoping to slip by unnoticed. Nathan had made it clear. This was the only chance they'd get. Nathan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek earpiece. "Stay close," he instructed, his voice low but firm. "We've done our homework. Now, we execute." He handed it to Sophie, his fingers brushing hers for a brief moment. Sophie took the earpiece, feeling the pulse of tension in the air. Sophie nodded, slipping the earpiece into her ear. She could hear Nathan's voice immediately, steady and calm. "Head straight for the side door. The guards will be preoccupied. We've arranged for a window of time. It won't be long." They reached the side door, and Sophie glanced over her shoulder, feeling the weight of every step she took. She knew Nathan was right. There was no turning back. The plan was set, and there was no space for mistakes. She took a deep breath, readying herself for what was to come. "You're doing great," Nathan's voice crackled in her ear, his tone reassuring. "Stay focused. We need this." As she stepped through the door, Sophie felt the cold air of the mansion's interior hit her like a wave. The floor was smooth marble, the lighting dim and rich, casting shadows in every corner. It was beautiful, and it was suffocating. She swallowed hard, the pressure of the task at hand weighing down on her. Sophie moved carefully, as though each step might be her last. She wasn't just trying to get through the door anymore. She was trying to get close enough to Richard to uncover what he had done, and what he was still doing. She walked deeper into the mansion, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. She passed grand paintings, sculptures, and the sharp glint of gold accents in the hall. The place felt cold, sterile, like it was meant to intimidate, to assert dominance. Nathan's voice cut through the tension. "You're almost there. Keep going. Richard's study is on the second floor. I've mapped the layout. There's a way in." Sophie's heart hammered in her chest as she turned the corner, reaching the stairs. Every second felt like it stretched into eternity. She tried to steady her breathing, but the walls seemed to close in. The mission was going too smoothly. She couldn't afford to get complacent now. There was something about the silence that made her skin crawl. As Sophie climbed the stairs, a sudden sound made her freeze. A door opening. Footsteps. Someone was coming. She ducked into the shadow of a large painting, her breath caught in her throat. She could hear the footsteps growing louder. Then, they stopped, right in front of her. Her heart pounded in her chest as the figure paused just a few feet from where she stood. It was a man, a guard, perhaps, who glanced around, his eyes scanning the hallway. Sophie held her breath, praying he wouldn't look her way. She could feel the sweat collecting on her palms. The guard took a few more steps before continuing down the hallway. Sophie exhaled, her body trembling. That was too close, but she couldn't waste any more time. She moved quickly now, heading straight for the study. The door was locked. Sophie paused, her mind racing, but Nathan's voice came through clearly in her ear. "The key code is 4082. It's on the back of the painting. You've got this." Sophie's hands shook as she reached up to slide the painting aside, revealing a small keypad on the wall. She punched in the code, her heart thundering in her chest. The door clicked open, and she stepped inside. The room was dim, filled with the scent of leather-bound books and expensive furniture. Richard's study. Sophie felt the weight of it, the power that had been wielded from this very room. But she couldn't focus on that. She needed the files. She had to find the evidence, before it was too late. As she rummaged through the desk drawers, her hands trembling with both fear and determination, Sophie's eye caught something. A folder, thick with papers, hidden beneath a stack of correspondence. She grabbed it and was about to open it when the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall again, louder this time. Someone was coming, and Sophie had only seconds to hide. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest as she quickly shoved the folder into her jacket. The footsteps were getting closer, too close for comfort. She had no time to think, only to act. She moved swiftly, sliding into a nearby alcove just as the door to Richard's study creaked open. The sound of Richard's deep voice filled the hallway, and Sophie pressed herself further into the shadows, praying she wouldn't be seen. She could hear him speaking to someone, his voice cold and sharp. "You're not getting away with this, Richard." Nathan's voice suddenly cut through, and Sophie's heart leapt in her chest. He was here. He had come for the showdown. Richard chuckled, but it was the kind of laugh that made Sophie's skin crawl. "Do you really think you can stop me? You think a little waitress has the power to take me down?" His words were venomous, filled with contempt. Sophie's hands tightened around the folder, the weight of the evidence feeling heavier than ever. She knew this moment would come. She had to stay calm. Had to get out of this unscathed. But everything was about to change. She could feel it in the air. Nathan's voice grew louder, more forceful. "I'm not just here to stop you, Richard. I'm here to expose everything you've done, and you're going to pay for it. All of it." Sophie's breath hitched. Was Nathan really going to take him on here, alone, in this mansion full of secrets? She couldn't let him do this without her, without the evidence she had just secured. She had to be part of this fight. She glanced around the corner, her mind racing. Richard's figure was moving toward Nathan now, his pace slow and deliberate. This was it. This was the confrontation that would change everything. "You really think you can take me down, Nathan?" Richard's voice was now laced with anger. "You've underestimated me from the beginning. You and your little plan. It ends here." Sophie stepped forward, her heart in her throat. She had to get the evidence to Nathan. Now. But as she took a step, her foot knocked a small object off the side table, sending it clattering to the floor. The noise was like thunder in the tense silence that had followed Richard's last words. Richard whipped around, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto Sophie's hiding place. What was that? He moved toward her, his face twisting into a sneer. You didn't think you could just slink around here unnoticed, did you? Sophie's heart raced as she stepped into the open, clutching the folder to her chest. She had no choice now. She had to act. I didn't have a choice, she said, her voice shaking but fierce. I'm not backing down, Richard. You're done. Richard's eyes widened in disbelief. You think you can threaten me? You think I'm afraid of you? He laughed bitterly, his face hardening with rage. Before he could move toward her, Nathan stepped between them, his hand outstretched. I think you're underestimating Sophie, Richard. This isn't just about me anymore. His eyes locked onto Richard's with the same cold intensity that Sophie had seen before. But there was something different now, something more personal. What do you mean? Richard asked, his voice wavering just a fraction, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. It was the first crack in his confident facade. Nathan's voice dropped to a low, lethal tone. It's not just Sophie you've wronged, Richard. It's me. And you'll find out just how much I'm willing to sacrifice to make sure you pay for what you've done. Sophie felt the heat of the moment hit her like a wave. This was no longer about taking down Richard. It was about survival. Nathan wasn't just going to expose him. He was going to burn his entire empire to the ground. Sophie realized, for the first time, that she wasn't just involved in this fight. She was the catalyst for it. You think you're untouchable, don't you, Richard? Nathan continued, his voice growing colder. But I've spent years building up my own empire. And now, it's time to take yours down. Sophie stepped forward, shaking, but determined. She looked down at the folder in her hands, and then back at Nathan, who stood resolutely before Richard. The truth is coming for you, Richard, she said, her voice stronger now. You can't hide anymore. Richard's face twisted with rage. You have no idea what you're starting, he spat, taking a step towards Sophie. But before he could make another move, Nathan stepped between them once more, his posture rigid and his gaze unwavering. It's over, Nathan said, his voice low, but filled with finality. Your empire is crumbling. You just don't know it yet. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Sophie stood frozen, the folder heavy in her hand. It was the moment they had been working for. But would it be enough to bring Richard down, or would it cost them everything? The silence in Richard's study was suffocating. Sophie's mind raced, her pulse pounding in her ears as the weight of the moment pressed down on her chest. Richard stood before them, his face flushed with anger, his eyes wild with disbelief. But Nathan stood still, unwavering, his presence a calm contrast to the storm that was brewing. Richard finally broke the silence, his voice dripping with venom. You think you can just waltz in here, take everything I've worked for, and walk away unscathed? His hands balled into fists, his rage barely contained. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Nathan's eyes never left Richard's face. There was no fear in his gaze, only cold resolve. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Richard. A man who spent his life hiding behind lies, using others to get what he wants. And now, it's time to pay the price. Richard's lips curled into a twisted grin, but there was no humor in it, only desperation. You think you've won? You think you've got me cornered? This isn't the end. It's only the beginning. Nathan stepped forward, his hand reaching into his jacket. For a moment, Sophie wondered what he was going to do. Was he going to make a move? Was this where it all went wrong? But instead, Nathan pulled out a small, unassuming envelope. He tossed it onto the table in front of Richard, who flinched, confused. What's this? Richard asked, his voice wavering just slightly. The truth, Nathan replied simply. Everything you've worked to bury. It's all here. Richard's eyes flicked between the envelope and Nathan, his face twisting with suspicion. He reached for it, his hands trembling slightly as he tore open the seal. His eyes scanned the contents quickly, the shock evident in his expression as he processed the documents in front of him. How? Richard's voice was a whisper, his composure slipping. How did you— It's over, Richard, Nathan said, his tone flat and final. You can't hide anymore. The evidence is in the hands of the authorities. They'll be here soon. Richard's face paled as he realized the gravity of the situation. His empire, the wealth, the control, was slipping through his fingers. He had built his world on corruption, lies, and manipulation. But now, with the truth laid bare, everything was falling apart. You think they'll believe you? Richard sneered, trying to hold on to some shred of dignity. You think the police will care about your little stack of papers? You think this will stop me? Nathan's gaze hardened. You've underestimated me, Richard. This isn't just about the police. It's about everything you've hidden. The deals, the murders, the people you've destroyed to keep your empire intact. Richard took a step back, his eyes wild with panic. You don't know what you're up against, he hissed. You don't understand the people I've worked with, the power I have. Nathan's expression remained unchanged. I know exactly what you've done, Richard. I know about your connections, your dealings with the politicians, the criminals, the people who run this city. And now, I have all the leverage I need. For the first time, Sophie saw a flicker of real fear in Richard's eyes. He looked around the room, as if searching for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. He was cornered, and he knew it. This is it, Richard, Nathan said, his voice low but powerful. Your empire is crumbling. Your past is catching up with you. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. Richard's hand shook as he gripped the edge of the desk, his mind racing for an answer, for a way out. But the truth had been laid out in front of him, and the pieces were falling into place faster than he could react. But then, just as Sophie thought it was over, a new voice echoed through the door, a voice Sophie recognized all too well. You've made a mistake, Nathan, the voice said, and Sophie's heart sank as she saw the figure standing in the doorway. The door creaked open, and Sophie froze. There, standing in the doorway, was someone she never expected to see. It was her ex-boyfriend, Eric. His familiar face, cold, hard, and filled with that same arrogance, was now framed in the doorway. He glanced between Nathan and Richard with a knowing smirk. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. Eric. Of all the people to show up now, it had to be him. The same man who had abandoned her when she needed him most. The same man who had chosen Richard's world over hers. Sophie felt the anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't afford to lose control now. Nathan's expression barely changed, but Sophie could see the shift in his posture. He had clearly recognized Eric. The calm, cool demeanor that had always defined Nathan faltered for just a moment. Something flickered in his eyes that Sophie didn't quite understand. Eric's eyes locked onto Sophie, and his grin widened. Well, 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 what do we have here? He sneered, taking a step into the room. I didn't expect to see you working with Nathan Westbrook, Sophie. This is a new low, even for you. Sophie's blood boiled, but she held her ground. What are you doing here, Eric? She asked, her voice steady despite the wave of emotions threatening to overtake her. I thought you were done with this. Done with everything. Eric's eyes narrowed, the smug expression on his face shifting into something darker. I'm not here for you, Sophie. I'm here for him. He jerked his thumb in Nathan's direction, his voice dripping with contempt. You have no idea who you're messing with, Nathan. This isn't a game anymore. Sophie felt the chill in the room deepening. Eric's presence was like a storm cloud, casting an oppressive shadow over the confrontation. This wasn't just about exposing Richard anymore. This was about something far more dangerous. Sophie had no idea what Eric was involved in now, but she could feel the shift in the air. The stakes were rising. Nathan didn't flinch. His voice was steady, unwavering. What are you doing here, Eric? You don't belong in this conversation. He glanced at Richard, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Did you bring him here? Eric smirked again, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard. Oh, Nathan, you really have no idea, do you? Richard and I have a little arrangement, one that you've just walked into. You think you can just expose him and walk away with everything intact? It doesn't work that way. Sophie's mind raced. What was Eric involved in? What deal had he made with Richard that could undo everything they'd worked for? The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in around them. Nathan's eyes remained locked on Eric, but there was a shift in his tone, something sharper, more dangerous. If you've come here to protect Richard, Eric, you're going to regret it. This ends tonight. Eric laughed, his voice echoing off the walls. Oh, I don't think you understand, Nathan. It's already too late. I've been working with Richard for years. You're not going to bring him down. You're not going to win. The air in the room grew thick with danger. Sophie felt the weight of her choice now more than ever. She was standing at the center of a battle between two powerful forces. Nathan, the man who had shown her a glimpse of hope, and Eric, who had always been a symbol of betrayal and manipulation. You've been working with him, Eric, Nathan said slowly, his voice growing colder, his eyes fixed on Sophie's ex. But that ends now. Richard's empire is coming down, and you're not going to stop it. Eric's face twisted with rage, his jaw clenched. You think I care about your little game, Nathan? This isn't about you. This is about power. This is about survival. And you, Sophie, you're nothing but a pawn in a game you can't possibly understand. Sophie's heart raced as Eric's words cut through her like a knife. A pawn? Was that all she was to Nathan? A small part in his war against Richard? She glanced at Nathan, searching his face for any sign of what he was really after. Was he just using her to settle a score? But before Sophie could voice her doubt, Nathan's voice broke through the tension. I'm done with your threats, Eric. I've played the game your way for long enough. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. This ends now. We're taking Richard down. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. Sophie could feel the moment hanging in the air, thick with both fear and anticipation. The confrontation was at its peak, and everything she had worked for, everything she had feared, was about to come to a head. The next step they took would change everything. But just as the words hung in the air, the door to the study burst open once more, and in walked another figure, this one far more dangerous than anyone could have predicted. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as she saw the man who had been behind Richard's rise to power, the final piece of the puzzle she hadn't expected to face. The door to Richard's study swung open with a heavy creak, and Sophie's heart dropped. Standing in the doorway was a man she hadn't seen in years. A man whose presence sent a chill down her spine. It was Michael Graves, the man who had been the true architect behind Richard's rise to power. The man who had helped turn Richard into the ruthless mogul he was today. Michael had been the shadow in the background, the puppeteer pulling the strings. And now, here he was, standing in the doorway like a specter from Sophie's past. Sophie had heard whispers of him, of course. No one in Richard's world was ever truly out of reach. Michael was the money man, the one who brokered the deals, the one who made things happen in the darkness. But Sophie had never expected to see him here. Not like this. Michael's piercing gaze swept over the room, his eyes settling on Sophie for a brief, calculating moment. Then, without acknowledging her further, he turned his attention to Nathan and Eric. The tension in the room thickened, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Well, Michael said smoothly, his voice cold and precise. I see you've brought out the big guns, Nathan. How quaint. I didn't expect this level of desperation from you. Nathan's jaw tightened, but his demeanor remained calm, unshaken. Desperation? Nathan echoed, his voice controlled but laced with an underlying fury. This is justice, Michael, and you're going to pay for every deal, every secret you've buried. Michael chuckled, a dark, hollow sound that made Sophie's skin crawl. Justice? Is that what you think this is? This is a power play, Nathan, and you've just walked into a game you don't understand. You're out of your depth, and this little vendetta you've been playing? It ends tonight. Sophie watched, her breath shallow. As the two men faced off, the world she had once thought was simple, her struggle with Richard, her search for the truth, had now expanded into something much bigger, much darker. Michael wasn't just a business partner. He was a force, a well-connected and dangerous man who had far more influence than Sophie could have ever imagined. The walls around Sophie seemed to close in, the weight of the reality she was facing crashing down on her. She wasn't just trying to take down Richard anymore. She was up against an entire network, one that stretched beyond Richard, one that was rooted in power, corruption, and blood. Nathan didn't break his gaze from Michael, his expression hardening. "I'm not walking into anything, Michael. You are. And the walls are closing in." Michael stepped further into the room, his presence overwhelming. "We'll see about that, won't we? You're playing a dangerous game, Nathan. And Sophie, well, she's just a pawn in it." Sophie felt the sting of his words, but there was something else too. A fire, a desire to prove him wrong, to prove them all wrong. She wasn't a pawn. She was the key to all of this. But how much longer would she survive in this game? And at what cost? "You've underestimated me, Michael," Nathan said, his voice now dripping with menace. "You're playing with fire, and this time, I'm the one who's holding the match." But Sophie could feel the uncertainty creeping in. Nathan was powerful, but Michael wasn't someone to take lightly. The threat was real. This was bigger than anything she had anticipated. The danger wasn't just physical, it was political, financial, and far-reaching. Michael Graves was a player in a much larger game, and Sophie had just stepped into the center of it. "You think you can take me down with a few documents?" Michael scoffed, his eyes scanning the room. "Do you really think that's going to change anything?" Nathan remained silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing as the tension in the room thickened. Then, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a flash drive. He tossed it onto the desk between him and Michael. "This is what changes everything," Nathan said, his voice laced with finality. "The truth. Your empire of lies, Michael. It's all here, and it's over." Michael's eyes darted to the flash drive, then back to Nathan. He didn't pick it up. He didn't need to. He already knew what was on it. But then, with a cold smile, Michael leaned forward. "You don't get it, do you?" he asked, his voice now calm, too calm. "The moment you exposed Richard, you exposed yourself, Nathan. And you think this," he gestured to the flash drive, "is going to save you? You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The final battle. The moment everything came to a head. There was no turning back now. As Michael's words settled in, Sophie understood the truth. Nathan wasn't just fighting for justice. He was fighting for survival. The room fell into silence as the threat hung heavy in the air. Sophie could feel the world spinning around her, the stakes higher than ever. And as Michael took one last step toward Nathan, a chilling realization washed over her. The game wasn't just about exposing Richard anymore. It was about staying alive long enough to do it. The silence in Richard's study was deafening as Michael's words lingered in the air, cold and final. Sophie felt like the ground beneath her was slipping away. Nathan had come to bring down Richard, but now Michael had revealed the true depth of the danger. The fight wasn't just about exposing one man. It was about toppling an entire network of power that stretched far beyond what Sophie had imagined. Sophie's mind raced, trying to process everything. She had never thought this would be easy, but now, it was clear that she was caught in something much bigger than her initial plan. There were forces at play here that couldn't be easily undone, people who would go to any lengths to protect their interests. She had come to this mansion hoping to expose the truth, to fight back against the man who had taken everything from her. But now, standing here in the center of the storm, Sophie realized that the truth wasn't the only weapon being wielded in this war. Nathan's face was hard, his jaw clenched as he stared Michael down. He had prepared for this moment, but Sophie could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Michael wasn't just a business rival. He was part of the very system Nathan was trying to tear down. A man who had power and resources that Nathan couldn't even begin to match. Michael's smirk was the last thing Nathan had expected. "You think you can beat me, Nathan?" Michael's voice was thick with contempt. "You're nothing but a footnote in a much larger story. A boy playing at a game he'll never understand. You've lost. And now, your precious little plan? It's over." Nathan didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed and his lips tightened, but his composure was slipping. "It's not over, Michael. Not yet. You've made a mistake, and you're about to find out just how big of a mistake it was. Sophie's pulse quickened as she watched the two men, each one so sure of themselves, each one ready to destroy the other. But Sophie knew something neither of them had yet realized. The game was changing. She wasn't just an innocent bystander anymore. She was part of the battle, whether she wanted to be or not. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "You're wrong, Michael," she said, her words steady and firm. "This isn't over, not by a long shot. I'm not just some pawn in your game. I'm here to win." Michael turned his head slowly to face her, a mocking smile on his lips. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think you can stand against me, Sophie? After everything I've done? You're nothing. You're no one." Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. Michael's words stung, but they also fueled something inside her. She wasn't going to let him win. Not now. Not after everything she had fought for. She had the evidence now. She had the truth. And she was going to use it. But before Sophie could respond, Nathan's eyes darted to something behind her. He didn't say a word, but the shift in his posture told Sophie that something was wrong. She turned just in time to see a shadow move across the doorway. Another figure, a man in a dark suit, stepping into the room. The man was tall, his face obscured by a dark mask, but his presence was undeniable. He moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the room as though he were looking for something, or someone. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the danger immediately. Nathan's voice dropped to a low growl. "Get down!" he shouted, grabbing Sophie by the arm and pulling her behind him just as a shot rang out. The bullet missed them by mere inches, slamming into the wall with a deafening crash. Sophie's heart stopped as she looked at Nathan, his expression now a mask of pure determination. The man in the doorway was no ordinary guard. He was a hired assassin, sent to eliminate them both. Sophie's legs shook as she crouched behind Nathan, her mind racing. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. This was life or death. Michael had set them up. He had used his connections to bring them to the brink of destruction. Nathan's voice was calm but edged with urgency. "Stay low, Sophie," he whispered, his eyes never leaving the man in the doorway. "This is far from over, but it's about to get a hell of a lot more dangerous." Sophie's thoughts were a blur of panic and adrenaline. She had come here for justice, to expose Richard, to bring down the man who had destroyed her family. But now, she was caught in a battle far beyond her control. Nathan was her ally, but she was starting to wonder if he was in deeper than even she could understand. The assassin stepped forward, his gun raised, his eyes locked on Nathan. But just as he was about to fire, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the mansion. Someone else had entered the fray. Sophie's mind raced. Was it the police? Had they finally arrived? The sharp, blinding flash of gunfire echoed through the study, the bullet narrowly missing Nathan. Sophie's heart slammed against her chest as she ducked lower, pressing herself against the cold marble floor, her breath shallow and frantic. The assassin, his face hidden behind a black mask, moved quickly toward Nathan, his gun raised. But Nathan was faster. With one swift motion, he shoved Sophie to the side and rolled out of the assassin's line of sight, drawing a small, sleek weapon from beneath his coat. His movements were fluid, controlled. This wasn't the first time he'd been in a life-or-death situation. Sophie watched, wide-eyed, as Nathan stood tall, aiming his weapon at the assassin with deadly precision. "You don't want to do this." Nathan's voice was low, steady, but full of command. There was no hesitation in his eyes, only the cold, calculating focus of someone who had faced danger before and knew exactly how to deal with it. The assassin hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting between Nathan and the door, where Richard had disappeared moments ago. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. One wrong move, and the entire room would explode into chaos. "You're not getting out of here," Nathan said, his voice unwavering. "You'll tell me who sent you, or I'll make sure you regret it." Sophie could feel her heart thundering in her ears as she pressed her back against the desk. She was powerless in this moment, completely at the mercy of Nathan and the assassin. She had never imagined her life would lead her to this point, caught between the tangled webs of lies, power, and violence. The assassin's fingers tightened around the gun, but instead of firing, he lowered it slightly, eyes flickering toward the door. Sophie could see the internal conflict in his eyes. He wasn't just a hired hand. He was someone who had a purpose in this chaotic world. But even he wasn't sure how far to push his luck with Nathan. Then, in an unexpected move, the assassin dropped his gun to the floor. The sound of it hitting the marble was sharp, like a death sentence. "I don't know who sent me," he muttered, his voice low and resigned. "But if I were you, I'd leave now. This isn't the kind of game you think it is." Sophie's mind spun. Who was this man? Why had he suddenly given up so easily? Nathan didn't lower his weapon, his eyes narrowing, scanning the man in front of him, waiting for more. He knew there had to be more to the story. "You're still alive because I let you be," Nathan said, his voice laced with cold steel. "But you're walking out of here with your life, and if you ever try to harm Sophie again, you won't be so lucky." The assassin, defeated, nodded quickly, backing away. "You're making a mistake," he muttered, casting one last look at Sophie and Nathan before disappearing into the hallway, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Sophie sat there, stunned, watching the door close behind him. For a moment, the world outside the study seemed to fade away. The immediate danger had passed, but the storm that had been unleashed, both in the mansion and in their lives, was far from over. "Are you okay?" Nathan's voice was soft now, though it still carried the weight of his authority. He stepped closer to Sophie, his eyes scanning her face as if looking for any sign of injury. She nodded but couldn't bring herself to speak. The adrenaline from the close call still coursed through her veins, and she felt dizzy from the shock. In that moment, Sophie realized how deep into this world she had gone. One moment, she was serving customers at a restaurant, trying to survive the day. The next, she was caught in a deadly game of power, betrayal, and revenge, her life hanging in the balance. Nathan had pulled her into this world, and now, there was no escape. "I'm fine," Sophie said, her voice finally steady as she stood up, her legs shaky. "But we need to get out of here. If Michael sent him, there's no telling how much more danger is lurking around the corner." Nathan nodded, his expression grim. He knew Sophie was right. The game had just shifted again. Richard's empire wasn't just built on lies, it was built on blood. And now, they were playing on his turf. Michael Graves was still out there, and if Nathan didn't act fast, everything he had worked for would unravel before his eyes. "We'll get out of here, Sophie," Nathan said firmly. "But we're not finished yet. We're closer than we've ever been." As they made their way toward the door, Sophie felt the weight of what was to come. They had just survived a close call, but there were far more dangers ahead. And the truth they were after, about Richard, about Michael, about everything, was more elusive than ever. But as they reached the door, a voice suddenly echoed from the hallway, a voice that froze both of them in their tracks. "I wouldn't go out there if I were you." Sophie and Nathan stood frozen in the doorway of Richard's study, the warning from the mysterious voice still hanging in the air. Sophie's pulse raced, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch on endlessly. But Nathan, ever the strategist, didn't hesitate. "Stay close," Nathan whispered, his eyes scanning the hallway outside the study, his senses alert. Sophie nodded, though her legs still felt unsteady from the adrenaline of the close call. The world had shifted beneath her feet, and now, every step felt like walking a tightrope. As they cautiously stepped into the hallway, the sound of the voice, soft, yet commanding, came again. "You think you can just walk out of here, Nathan? You're in more danger than you realize." This time, they could see the source of the voice. A man emerged from the shadows at the end of the hallway, his features half hidden by the low light. Sophie couldn't place him, but there was something all too familiar about the cold certainty in his eyes. Nathan stepped forward, his posture still calm, but there was a flicker of something darker in his eyes now. Recognition. "David," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "What are you doing here?" The man who had been watching them, the one who had spoken so ominously, was David Carter. Nathan's oldest and most trusted ally in the business world. But Sophie's shock grew as she realized that this wasn't the man Nathan had known so well anymore. This was a man who had been consumed by greed and ambition, someone who had crossed lines Nathan had never expected. "What I'm doing here," David chuckled darkly, the sound echoing in the hallway. "I'm cleaning up the mess you made, Nathan. This was never about exposing Richard. It was about exposing you." Sophie's stomach dropped. She turned to Nathan, searching his face for answers. But Nathan's expression remained stoic, his jaw clenched as if he were processing the bombshell David had just dropped. "You were the one who sold us out, David?" Nathan's voice was low, his words thick with disbelief. "After everything we built together?" "Built together?" David scoffed. "You think you had anything to do with this, Nathan? You were a pawn in a much bigger game. And now, I'm making sure you're removed from it once and for all. You're nothing but a shadow of your former self, trying to clean up a mess that was never yours to begin with." Sophie's mind raced. David had been playing both sides, using Nathan's trust to climb higher, only to now betray him at the most critical moment. Sophie realized that everything she had fought for, the evidence, the truth, was now tangled in a web of deceit far deeper than she had anticipated. But Sophie wasn't going to back down. Not now, not after everything. She had come too far, and she wasn't going to let someone like David destroy everything they had worked for. She stepped forward, her voice steady but fierce. "You're wrong, David," she said, her eyes locking onto his with defiance. "This isn't your game to win. It's ours." Nathan turned to Sophie, his eyes softening for a brief moment. Then he squared his shoulders and looked back at David. "You're right about one thing," Nathan said, his voice thick with quiet rage. "This was never about me. It was always about what's right." David's eyes flickered with something akin to fear, but he quickly masked it with arrogance. "You're finished, Nathan. It's over." Sophie didn't wait. She stepped forward, pulling out the flash drive from her pocket, the one that contained the damning evidence they needed to destroy Richard's empire. "I don't think it's over, David," she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the hallway. "This is just the beginning." David's expression darkened as he reached for his phone, but before he could make the call, a sharp noise interrupted him. The sound of sirens echoed through the mansion, growing louder and closer. Sophie turned toward Nathan, her heart racing in realization. The authorities had arrived. The truth was finally catching up with them. David cursed under his breath, turning to flee. But it was too late. The walls were closing in. As the police stormed through the doors, Sophie felt the weight of everything they had worked for beginning to unravel. The truth was out. Richard's empire was crumbling. And for the first time in a long while, Sophie felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. The fight wasn't over. There would still be consequences. There would still be battles to face. But the man who had destroyed her family, the man who had twisted their lives for his own gain, was finally going to pay. And Sophie would make sure of it. Sophie and Nathan stand together as the police move in, the evidence finally in their hands. David is arrested, Richard's empire begins to fall apart, and justice is finally within their reach. But as the scene fades, there's a lingering question. What will Sophie and Nathan do next? They've won this battle, but the war is far from over.